I'm back with another video, and this video is going to be looking at Liverpool versus Everton, who was able to beat Liverpool for the first time in over a decade at Anfield today. So we're going to take an in-depth tactical analysis look at what happened during the game and how Everton were able to pull it off. So this is going to be made using Keyframe. I'll put the link below so you guys can check it out, and let's get right into it. So when Everton played deeper, closer to their own goal, they implemented a 5-3-2 with a slight midfield rotation to create a right wing back so that they could defend the widths of the field through their five-man back line better and control movements from Salah and Robertson or Mane and Trent Alexander-Arnold, whoever the Liverpool players were occupying the wide areas, and the two forwards along with the three midfielders from Everton gave them more access to the initial build-up of Liverpool, because Liverpool use oftentimes a deep fullback or dropping holding midfielders as well as a 2-3 build-up structure. So the three-man midfield and two forwards from Everton gave them good access to these players and allowed them to use their cover shadows and compactness to control the dangerous spaces between the lines. So here we have Jordan Henderson coming from a deeper area, driving forward as a center back, while Thiago drops between them, creating a back three with Kabak on the weak side. And so now we see the rondo situation that Liverpool is able to create using the false nine Roberto Firmino and the player holding the width, Andy Robertson. So we have a firm four-man structure, and we can already see how Everton's shape match up against it. The use of wide central defenders was quite clever from Carlo Ancelotti because of the false nine positioning of Firmino. This typically puts players like Mane more narrow in the half space with flexibility to move. So by creating these wide central defenders, they were able to jump into the half space more to track runs of players like Mane, as well as having cover in behind and using numerical superiority. So a big concept there and a lot more to come. And then we will also see how they were able to close down wider areas with Coleman jumping, Decore sliding over with his three-man midfield to block off Firmino, and then as well the two forwards shifting over to then create more access to the ball. So continuing on now, we can see Liverpool in possession again with our two center defenders, Robertson as the weak side fullback, Thiago playing in the holding midfield role as Gini Wijnaldum goes forward. And now we'll just take a look at this picture in terms of Everton's shape and how they switch higher up the field into a 4-4-2 with Davies all the way to Coleman, creating the four-man midfield and their two forwards. So this is more of a 4-4-2 situation, and it primarily stems from the fact that Andy Robertson is now the deep fullback, so Coleman is not necessarily needed in the back line to defend across the width. So a compact midfield shape will be more effective, as well as we can see the tendencies from the two forwards of Everton to use their cover shadows to block Gini Wijnaldum and Thiago, who played primarily deeper within the team, playing as deep-lying playmakers, often dropping between center backs or towards the outside into the half spaces. So by controlling these two, the build-up is already put under a lot of stress if these two players are taken out of the situation. So with Andy Robertson as well dropping deeper, both double pivots are blocked off. This transitions Everton into a 4-4-2 higher up the field, but not necessarily looking to get overstretched but just creating access to these players. So now moving to the low block again, we can see clear as day a 5-3-2, and this is really extending to create access, like we said, to the wider players, as well as track narrow runs from Salah, and by having numerical superiority in the central of defense, we have 3 center defenders, with giving them more cover in behind, as well as making them more flexible in their movements, allowing them to jump between the lines, creating vertical partnerships with the midfielders ahead of them. So what I mean by this is our 3-man midfield. If Mane was to drop deeper between the lines, Doucouré can easily jump towards the ball using his cover shadow, and one of the near side central defenders will also be able to jump and follow Mane while still having cover in behind through the most central defender. And this was often the case when trying to defend against Liverpool's wide structures. And by wide structures, I mean the players like Mane, Robertson, and Wijnaldum. So the players who are extending through half spaces and the wide corridor, forming these wide structures that are often very fluid from Liverpool, trying to look for the space in behind with the threat going in behind the defense, as well as trying to pin the players through the between the lines positions. So now, continuing on, we see the compactness again from Everton, and they often stuck to their 5-3-2. And one important thing to note is that one thing I did notice is there could have been more staggering between the lines, but with a 5-man back line, it can be quite hard to create this staggering between players, between the 2 defensive lines. But their vertical compactness, although they didn't stagger as much as I thought they would have, they still attempted to, and the vertical compactness to control players like Firmino between the lines and Salah between the lines, to control these players. Their high level of vertical compactness made it completely possible for them to control these players. And with the front 3 from Liverpool playing quite narrow often, the back 5, the flexibility as we talked about in the last clip, it gave them to then jump between the lines if they're defenders and use the cover shadows of midfielders, while the midfielders were very capable of jumping out to press a player knowing they were covered in behind. And now the use of the wide structures, we can just see it again here. If we just highlight it with Trent Alexander-Arnold, Curtis Jones, and now Firmino. So the use of the wide structure was apparent throughout most of the game, as it usually is for Liverpool, and it can stem from their 2 center backs and the relationship that the midfielders and fullbacks have. So their 2-3 structure, and then we can see how it's been matched now by a 2-3 and then a 5-man back line from Everton, looking to control Liverpool's build-up and match them. So the players as forwards, they're looking to use their cover shadows to block access to the central playmakers, as well as being covered by the Everton midfielders and by being covered then by the defenders from Everton as well. So continuing on now, we can look at their hyper compactness in crossing situations and their numerical advantage they create for themselves by always having the free man, as we see a back 4 within the box defending deeper, and the 3 advanced players and an advanced attacking midfielder from Liverpool gives them a man-for-man marking system, as well as cover of the three midfielders. And when you have this kind of numerical advantage across two lines, sometimes it can be more beneficial to go through a spatial orientation marking system, because the main thing with this is controlling the space between the lines now. So when we look at this, if we look at the space between the lines here, it's so important to keep this very compact and very tight, because if this fails and there's more space created in crossing positions, this is where the runs are being made from, and these are the spaces where the ball can be crossed into. But with the back five being covered by the midfield three and closing these spaces, it gives Liverpool players virtually no area to make runs into dangerous positions, and it allows them to step out quicker when the ball is recirculated or off second balls and whatnot. So just a point there. And now we can see Everton playing in possession of the ball, which didn't happen often. Oftentimes their attack was broken down very quickly, but they did build up with a three-man back line in their first phase, and their double pivot was very apparent. But again, they didn't have too much build-up, because Liverpool's counter-pressing and the intensity at which they played, they didn't really get out of their low block structure very much. And it's important, if you want to understand how teams and how their playing styles are affected by all phases of the game, really look at Everton and look at how playing in primarily a low block can impact a team so much in their offensive phase. Everton weren't very effective when in possession in transition, when they looked to establish their structure in possession, because all their players were so close to each other, which made them very susceptible to counter press and force them to go long. But we see our double pivot from Everton in this situation, playing between defenders to try and narrow them, to then progress through a wide area, or narrow them to then give them more spaces to go long. So now Everton are able to move forward, and we can look at just their midfield shape, and it's almost a four-man midfield shape, with Digne going up as a left fullback now, or left wing back, and we have James looking to get between the lines where he's most dangerous, while Richarlison makes the runs in behind. So Richarlison pushes back the defenders so that James Rodriguez can then get between the lines on the ball and try and exploit the advanced area spaces. And then we can see the Liverpool shape. They organize very quickly and are able to gain pressure on the ball with their staggered midfield shape, being drawn forward, as well as starting to leave space between the lines because of the lack of occupation that Everton have in advanced areas. So this will be drawing the midfield forward, allowing for these spaces between the lines to occur, where James looks to get on the ball and create a decisive action. So now we see James does receive the ball, but he's followed by a Liverpool defender, and just when this happens, when James forces the defender to jump, we see how much space is left in behind for Everton to potentially access, with Richarlison making his run in behind. Just it didn't work out in this situation, but we can also see the Liverpool defenders and how disconnected their shape is, but guarded by a very compact midfield three, which gives them numbers around the ball between the lines to control these dangerous areas that allow them to win the ball back very quickly. And then the structure from Everton deeper doesn't really lend itself well to a counter-pressing side to then win the ball back again for a fast transition. It lends itself more to a conservative side that play in a low block as they did. So now A good picture here from a slightly removed camera angle. We have our two central defenders, and now we have ahead of them, we have our three-man build-up shape in front of them, and then now we can see the players moving between the lines. Curtis Jones accessing the half space, Firmino looking to get on the ball deeper, but really the decisions of play were worked off by advanced players. So Curtis Jones is the player taking advantage of the space Mane is creating him, and Mane, you can see, is pinning the wide central defender, which allows Curtis Jones to then access this space in the half space. And although Liverpool weren't able to take advantage of these areas in the half space too much, the concepts were still there. And then now we can see on the weak side the width being held by Andy Robertson, playing higher up the field, forcing the back five to defend across the full width of the field. And now the midfielders tracking runners from Liverpool, tracking runners coming from their blind spot, and players from deeper areas moving forward with the two forwards, trying to use their cover shadow to take off deep-lying playmakers in this three-man wall, protecting the back two. So now the play continues, and we see with Firmino running in behind, this pushes the two defenders from Everton backwards. So Digne and actually Tom Davies here is the midfield. It pushes them backwards to maintain numerical superiority across the back line, as we see here. Mane occupying two defenders, as well as them being conscious defending across the back all the way to the weak side. But the initial run from Firmino is able to push defenders backwards and pin the wing back temporarily, allowing Salah more time on the ball, as we see him here. And he can then move into an advanced area that's been vacated with runners like Mane coming more narrow, and Curtis Jones holding his width on the weak side half space to then try and trigger the space after the Everton defenses collapse, because this space is vacated, and this is the area that Liverpool will try to exploit. And when this is cut out, then the space will be on the weak side for Curtis Jones to take advantage of. And just important to note, the counter-pressing shape from Liverpool, very important. The three players ahead of the two central defenders are in close proximity to transition quickly and to counter-press Everton right away. So now, looking at Everton coming up the field a little bit more, we can see them in more of a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-3-1, as we see here with James and Richarlison. And then now we can see the Liverpool shape as well, incorporating Alisson just temporarily here. And Thiago and Wijnaldum both had the tendency to come deeper, which maybe allowed them to lose a little bit going forward, as usually their midfielders are more progressive and athletic. These two primarily stayed in deeper roles, trying to initiate wide rotations via their movement, dropping as deep-lying playmakers. So Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andy Robertson created the width, but they were quite narrow, and allowed the front three to then try and take advantage of space in behind. So when Everton looked to stretch out, Liverpool's shape often lured them to do this, so then they can access the space in behind the midfield and take advantage of a stretched Everton, which didn't happen very often. And now, just a little scene of Wijnaldum dropping alongside the center backs through the half space to try and increase his passing options, increase his position, his field of view, and the qualities of the pass. But when he was then dropping, this vacated the areas in which he could pass to, with James and Richarlison here using their cover shadow and forcing them into one direction. Made it difficult for players like Wijnaldum to find key spaces in this area, but we'll see how some circulation of play and restarting of the attack will allow Thiago to then come in as a central pivot and allow Liverpool to break the front two. So just a slight change of shape in the second half in response to the two forwards. So oftentimes when they would progress, Wijnaldum or Thiago would drop outside of the center backs as deep line playmakers to then vacate this area for players to move into. And when Thiago did so, it was very advantageous because his momentum was then bringing him forward to then spring the attack, and we have more than enough players in advanced areas to take advantage of. So here we see Thiago able to break the lines using a 3-1 build-up shape instead of a 2-3. So with Thiago gaining possession on the ball in the central corridor, this creates passing angles, diagonal passing options between midfielders, most importantly, and into the half space, where then they can progress and be much more dangerous in possession. So with Curtis Jones being free, Firmino taking advantage of the shifting principles of Everton with Andre Gomes, he was already shifting to then press Trent Alexander-Arnold, but this then created the free man through Curtis Jones and Firmino between the lines to then springboard the attack going forward. And this all started with just a slight change in the movements in the first line of build-up for Liverpool. So now we just see it again, and we just see an added player between the lines. I wanted to show this picture to just get the whole picture, stemming from Thiago, moving forward, Mane occupying the space between Everton midfielders, preventing them from easily jumping out to press the ball and put pressure on it to prevent progression. So by these two diamonds working together, we have three players virtually in advanced areas, two of them which affect the Everton midfield so much that they're hesitant to then pin or put pressure on the ball that Curtis Jones is receiving, and forces them into their low block, which is very spatially oriented, and they have a high priority on their vertical compactness, using the back five to span across the whole width of the field. So that's the analysis, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed watching it. Like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be great, and I'll see you in the next one.